Hi there. I'd like to talk today a little bit about the electric guitar. The electric guitar was built in this form, which is considered a solid body guitar. This is a solid piece of wood, around 1950. Before that, we had acoustic instruments that we simply fashioned pickups to. So it was essentially like an acoustic guitar, hollow body guitar, which used the resonance of the vibration of the strings to resonate within the body, and then that's what gave the acoustic energy, the amplified energy to the acoustic guitar. And then when pickups were invented, they were simply mounted to those acoustic instruments. It wasn't until about 1950 that the first mass-produced solid body guitar, like this one, came out. This is one of the early versions of that instrument. This is a Stratocaster, and this was made by Leo Fender, and he was the first one to come up with this design, which is just a solid piece of wood played on its own. It has almost no amplified energy. You can barely hear anything. Really, really quiet. All right? So it takes the amplification process. And what that uses is, I've mentioned the pickups before. So I have a pickup right here. And if you look really closely, what you're going to see, hopefully you can see that fairly clearly, are you going to see these little wires. And it's actually one long wire, very, very thin, that's wound around this essentially these series of magnets. Each of these circles that you see in here, they're magnets. And so those wires are wrapped around there, and you can see they're wired to this lead right here, which has been cut. Normally it'd be a lot longer piece of wire. And it's the vibration of the string over these magnets that creates a very, very small magnetic field. And a very small electrical impulse, just a few thousand, or a few millivolts rather. So it's not a lot of energy at all, so it needs to be amplified. And so it simply goes through this cable, goes into an amplifier, such as this one. And this particular amplifier, this is also by Fender. This is Fender Deluxe Reverb. This particular unit was made in 1966, so it's an original. It had been made in this format only for a couple of years. The amplifier right behind it, also a Fender, is a Fender Princeton amp. This was from 1964, and this was the first year that they came out with this, what we call the blackface, which is this black panel with the white lettering on it. And I only say that because by matter of importance, the only reason I say that is that this is the kind of the second, I guess, epoch, if you will, of the technology of amplifiers. And they really, really changed after this time period, and it drastically changed American popular music. So that's what we'll get into. The thing I want to mention about this too, I'm playing in my home studio. My family's in the other room. And this particular amplifier can get pretty loud, like most amplifiers do. But I'm using some kind of modern technology mixed with this old equipment here. I'm using what's called an aux box. It's made by Universal Audio. And it is a device that you can plug into the amplifier, and it simulates the load of the speaker. So I'm not actually going through the speaker of this amplifier. The output of this amplifier is plugged into the aux box, and that's what goes into the computer, and that's what's being recorded. So the sounds that you're hearing are sounds of the amplifier, but the microphones and the speaker and the room that you're hearing it in is all a simulation, a very, very accurate simulation. But this shows a little bit of how modern technology can be used to get modern recorded tones. And a lot of what you hear on the radio is done that way. Might be an authentic amp with a real microphone put in front of it, but oftentimes it's a setup similar to this. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? So this amplifier as I said, this is a 1966. Now, before 1966, we had some very basic guitar amplifier technology. And it was very, very sparse, right? So we had just a very simple kind of tone. Okay, all right, super simple tone. Nothing special to it. One of the things that's interesting about music too, and our perception of volume, our perception of loudness, it changes things. Quiet sounds sound very, soft and soothing. Sounds that are louder typically seem to have more energy, more excitement, and that all translates to guitar amplifiers too. That it does the same kind of thing. Amplifiers during this time period were built for this kind of clean sound, this really simple kind of sound like you're hearing. Right. Now, what happens when I turn the volume up, though, is something interesting happens. This isn't a volume control like a volume control on your car, right? It's not what we call a logarithmic scale. It's going to add and amplify more of this signal, but you'll see what happens. We get to a point where the volume doesn't get louder. It causes the circuitry inside to distort. This amplifier wasn't designed to do what we're about to do. It's designed to have this nice kind of clean sound. And you're kind of already hearing what's going on with that. If I turn the volume up, so just for reference, the volume is at 4, and on this particular amplifier. Now below that, if I turn it to 1, you don't hear a thing. It's just the guitar volume. I barely turn it up. This would be just loud enough to hear in your bedroom, without people outside being able to hear it too much. But listen to what happens when I put it on 4. See, the sound gets a little bit thicker. And you just start to get this sense of distortion. And that's going to be important because this amplifier, this particular amplifier, the Fender Deluxe Reverb, was used in a lot of early recordings for this purpose. Let me turn this up to 6, actually. You'll see what happens. The sound starts to distort a little bit. Okay, and that's important too, because if we turn this up even more to 8, you're going to hear a lot of distortion on this amplifier. Okay, and in a nutshell, that's what starts to change rock and roll quite a bit. Okay, let's back up though, however. Just to save some time, turning this amplifier up to 4 is kind of the sweet spot on these old amps. A lot of players found that out, right? So let me pause there for a minute. We'll kind of continue talking a little bit more about the guitar. So the guitar itself, you're going to notice 3 pickups, okay? And there's this switch right here, which is the selector switch. So you can see this is on the bottom position. That means this pickup is selected, what we call the bridge pickup, because it's the pickup closest to the bridge of the guitar. The second position, it actually selects these 2 pickups. This middle position selects just the middle. This fourth position here selects these 2 pickups. And then the very top position, position 5, selects the neck pickup. And these all have different sounds, and different genres have used these sounds to kind of, really to create an entire style. For one thing, Leo Fender himself was not a guitar player, but he loved the sound of slide guitar, of lap steel guitar, which in the late 1940s, early 50s, there was a boom in that style, in the Hawaiian slide guitar, and that made it into American popular music, especially in country. And they just used usually a steel bar, but the American blues guitarists started using these. This is an old bottle of, it was a medicine, it was called Coricidin. This is an old Coricidin medicine bottle, and they'd usually just put it on your third finger or fourth finger, and it creates kind of a similar technique to what the slide guitarists would do. More of a blues setting. Okay, more of a blues setting. A lot of the 1950s blues artists would take this new electrified guitar style and simply play the same thing that they would play in the Delta blues style. A very simple kind of thing. A lot of and that's on the bridge position, making that sound. It's very thin sounding, very kind of bright sounding. Second position kind of has this very percussive kind of sound. Favored a lot by the country guitarists, right? They love that kind of sound, that really... Right? They really love that kind of spanky sort of sound, right? It's very funny kind of sound. Right? If you get to, actually, on that same position, there's a whole other genre of guitar, funk guitar, which used that position a lot. So, the Detroit kind of Motown sound started that sort of kind of funky sound. And that's another more percussive way. Instead of just playing single notes, like the country players would, they would actually play chords. And it's a very percussive way of playing chords. And combined with a scratchy sound where I'm releasing the pressure of my fingers. Right, where they love that kind of sound, where it's just real spanky. Right, very, very cool sound. If you move on to the, notice I skip past the middle position. Notice I'm skipping past the fourth position. But go to the neck position, that same kind of genre, and that's a tone used in those two genres, funk, right? Notice that's a little bit thicker sounding than this second position. Right, this one's a little bit thicker. Right, so really, really cool sound. Also, the R&B of the time, the 1960s, would use that sound a lot. So again, this is all on the same volume control. This is the sweet spot of the amplifier. I'm just using different positions of the guitar. So this is on the neck position here. Okay, so they love that sound. Love that sound of the thicker sound of the neck pickup. It has a little bit of the percussive sound. Notice I was using this bar here too. This is a tremolo bar. And this really was designed to create a vibrato without having to do it with your fingers, which bends the pitch upward. When you do it faster, you just kind of hear it as a sort of a warble. But with the bar, I can bend the note upwards in a little bit smoother, more exaggerated manner, but then I can also detune the pitch a little bit. And where it was sort of designed to be used is a little combination of both. Really nice kind of vibrato technique. I've, by the way, pretty much gone through every major genre, which was kind of, coming to its maturity in the 1950s, 1960s. I didn't mention jazz, but just a simple roll of this tone control. If you notice this middle pickup right here, this middle knob is a tone control. So it gets really dark when I roll it off, and really bright when I turn it up. So if I kind of darken it up a little bit, about halfway off, and even though jazz players typically wouldn't play a solid body like this, it still gives us a lot of that kind of sound. Jazz sound right there. Okay. I mentioned before the turning up the volume of the instrument. So that starts to change music quite a bit as well. If you notice, a really important aspect of this guitar at this volume, it's still call a relatively clean sound, though you can kind of hear now, based on what I showed you before, there's still a little bit of a distortion to this sound, right? Especially if I hit it really, really hard. But single notes, which is the kind of the real turning point of amplifier technology, when acoustic instruments, acoustic guitarists couldn't play single note melodies, right, and be heard in front of an orchestra. So they were really kind of relegated to the rhythm section, playing chords. Right? So with the advent of volume, that meant that now single notes could be heard. And so that meant that the electric guitarist now could be seen as important as a trumpet player, as a saxophonist, as a soloist, as a solo instrument in front of a group. And that's a really, really big deal. And of course, from that point on, there's no looking back. Guitar is going to end up dominating rock music at that point. But at this low volume like this, you hear a pretty decent sustain of each note. That's already a longer sustain than an acoustic instrument, and at a louder volume, like we've already said. But if we turn the volume up, again, that was on 4. Let me turn this to 6. The sound changes a little bit. As we've said before, it distorts a little bit more. Okay, so you already notice I'm playing differently. I'm playing differently than when the volume was on 4. And it's because of that sustain That just makes you play a little bit differently. The notes can ring out more. There's more energy to them. When there's more energy, there's more excitement. And there's more excitement to the music you're playing, you can't help but play differently. It changes the style. So now we get, I'm going to boost this up a little bit more. This is at 7, which again, if it weren't for this technology, I'd be blowing my eardrums out in this room. But this is a simulated room that you're hearing. Just remember that. So it's a very loud amplifier. It's distorting the signal really, really badly. The amplifier can't keep up with the signal that I'm feeding it. I'm giving it too much. It's overdriving the amplifier. And it's that overdrive, the inability of the amplifier to reproduce the signal accurately is what gives it that sound, what gives it that energy. This is where blues goes from the slide kind of sound, which is still relatively clean, to the more distorted sound, which gives us the energy and then gives us single note phrasing. So the style changes and we get electric lead guitar, blues lead guitar. Another thing I want to mention, let me take this back to 4, is that there was technology that came out in the early 1960s, which we simply call pedals. They're effects pedals. One of the first ones was this one right here. This is the Ibanez Tube Screamer. And what it does is it effectively mimics what this amplifier is doing at loud volume. It's doing that in this circuit. So it's feeding the amplifier that same cranked amp sound, but at a quieter volume. And we can demonstrate that. I haven't set this up to sound exactly like the amp, but it's pretty darn close. Here's the amplifier on 8. And if I take the amplifier back to 4 and then turn this on, we get a sample that very similar sound. It's a very similar sound. The other thing that was an innovation of this amplifier was, if you kind of look through the controls, I haven't talked about, other than volume, right? Volume, there's treble and bass. And those don't really work the same way as treble and bass control, like on your car stereo or something like that. It's a little bit different. It has the guitar frequencies in mind. And I pretty much, like most people, leave that in the same kind of position each time. And so, but the next one over, if you see reverb, there's a reverb control. This is an innovation of this time as well, of the early 1960s. It's an artificial form of reverb. So like if you're standing in a big cathedral or in a hall and you clap your hands and you can hear it sort of reverberate through the room. This is an electronic simulation of that, and it uses springs in a very, very cool way. So turn this reverb up a little bit so you can hear it. And one of the first styles that made this popular was the ever famous surf guitar. So if I turn this up quite a bit, really familiar sound, I would think, right? famous sound in its day. Modern players of this amp really just barely have the reverb on like I do. This is only about this volume right here. Maybe a tad less. Another cool thing we can do is also part of the technology is we can add delay. Delay is another form of reverb in a sense. It's a time-based effect where what we do is we take originally, of course, a recorded an analog recording of a particular sound, and it's running right alongside the real amplifier. One of the earliest devices used for that was called an echoplex. And I don't have an original echoplex, but I have the simulation of it right here. So this is a delay effect. I play one note, and then it sustains the note through a series of delays. Nice kind of depth and thickness to the sound. Really pretty cool. Another effect we can use is a chorus effect, and a chorus is actually another kind of delay. It's a really short delay, but it copies the signal at just enough of a delay to where it sounds like there are two instruments playing, where it sounds double tracked effectively. Here's what the chorus sounds like. Really kind of a cool sound on its own. Here's without. With. Right, that particular unit that's giving that sound is an old CE1 chorus. Now with both of those effects on, with the delay and with the chorus, you get really interesting change to the sound. If we simulate our cranked amplifier. Into a pretty cool sound. Hope you enjoyed that presentation, and we'll see you next time.